Go live. I'm pushing the go live button and tweeting about the fact I'm going live. Hello people, good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Azrael, not here 10 minutes early? Well, thank you for waiting, brilliant. And, oh, 6 people, exciting. Hello everybody. I'm gonna let people drift in, just gonna tweet about it, and then we'll get in to a couple of optimization steps as well. I'm not sure whether Yann's gonna be able to join me. If he can, brilliant. He'll probably shout out in the chat in a moment or Discord me or something and let me know. Tonight we're gonna have a look at some optimization in Blender and in the Godot game engine as well, most of which will apply to all game engines. And they arrive. Hello. I don't like looking at the stats on YouTube. It's really weird. It'll go, you have no one watching, yet people are chatting. I'm like, oh, interesting. So I'll just send this tweet, and yeah, if you guys have any questions, of course, this is a great Q&A session as well, so feel free to just chime away, and I'll try my best to answer, especially if it's about Godot. Yann's the guy for that, but I know some of my stuff, so hopefully I'll be okay with it. Where's my hashtags? Blender and hashtag Godot. I wonder if anybody ever says anything about the order in which you do things when you hashtag them. Bob, retweet. Okay, awesome. Hopefully some people will drip in, and thank you for joining us. Right, awesome. Gonna grab a coffee. Now, where should we start? I think a great place to start will actually be with Blender itself. So with 3D models, that's my forte. Let's open up Blender and see where we are with things. Now, one of the things that we've come across really recently, because we've been making this Godot Getaway game, not Godot Getaway, oh, fluffed it already, Mag Racer game. We've already done the Godot Getaway stuff. So with Mag Racer, we really discovered... oh yes, I really enjoyed BlenderCon. BlenderCon was awesome. Shame I couldn't actually be there, but no one was there really, with it being a virtual event. Yeah, sorry about that earlier. I got all excited about doing this and was like, So in the box, I'm squirreled already. I should really have my squirrel mug. So in the box, they gave us this, which is a green shirt, as you can probably tell. Look, I can now do just a talking head with BlenderCon on it, which is pretty awesome. They gave us some delicious biscuits as well, which I have eaten 3 of and given 1 away. So they didn't last long. And they gave us some, because we couldn't actually go over to Amsterdam, I thought it was really awesome of them. They've actually got some postcards, which is absolutely amazing. So even though I couldn't go to Amsterdam this year round, hopefully that it'll be available next year. They sent us out some postcards to, as if we were there, which is really sweet of them and really nice. Oh, and yeah, something else they gave, I'll just move my stuff around, a little mouse mat, which, you know, it's actually really, really small, but actually for me is incredibly useful because I've got a space that it exactly fits. And I've been wanting to get a mouse mat, but every one I've looked at so far has just been too big and I didn't want to cut anything down. So, yeah, BlenderCon was amazing. It was great to see all the Blender artists out there and what they're up to, what they've been up to with the world, how it is at the moment. So, yeah, phenomenal to see what they've been up to. Back over to Blender for the moment. So it's a good segue back over into Blender. Am I big enough down in the corner here? I'm kind of squidged over to one side. Perhaps I can do that. There we go. Yes, so let's open up our ships file that we've got in Blender, because I want to start with this. This guy here is absolutely horrible as far as it comes for a game engine. And this is the one we're using in-game. Let's turn on, under overlays, let's turn on our statistics. So the main issue with this particular model is the fact that it was made more as a 3D sketch more than anything else. So it's just, oh, let's put some stuff on. There's a greebling add-on that you can use, and it adds all of these really nice bolts and nuts and things like that. But if we zoom in really close to, can we get into that area there, you'll notice that each one of these little rivets or screws or bolts or whatever, they are actual icospheres, I think. Yeah, they are icospheres. Obviously big pieces like this that get bolted on, they are absolutely fine. They're not really exceeding any Polygon budget. But this guy here is horrendous. And by the time you total everything up, here we can see up in the top here, this is reading out at 81,000 polygons for something. I swear it was higher the other day. We are looking at the right thing, yeah. Perhaps it's all these ships together. But anyway, when you start to think about these ships, there's going to be multiple of them, and it won't just be an instanced, well, it'll be an instance mesh if there was another one of these, but when bearing that in mind, if there's 12 of these, we're up to 1.2 million polygons just on ships alone. Now, they're not all that bad. If we have a look at something like this ship here, is this going to tell me the individual stats? No, I missed it, you know, when it was down here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say, go away, Blender 2.9, and let's bring back my good old friend Blender 2.8, because it's not giving me the stats when I click on it like it used to in Blender 2.83. When it opens up, there we go. Let's open up ships again. By the way, I've got all of my work in source control. As we can see down at the bottom here, don't just open up things backwards and forwards between Blender 2.9 and Blender 2.8. It will cause you some pain someday. So yeah, about 82,000 triangles in this particular model, and then we were going over to the rest of the craft. So if we have a look at, turn on here, have a look at our delta, which is one of our more simple ones itself, that's 90,000. No, is it not going to here we go. So that one is 8.9 thousand. So 8.9, yeah, so 8,900, which is a very low polygon count compared to the clunky, or what we're now calling the Sentinel, up 81,000. So there's a huge difference in mesh density between the two, and that caused us a ton of issues when it came to texturing as well, because if we go ahead and grab something like this particular model and try and texture it, the UV editing window, let's get rid of that tool shelf, the UV editing window ends up looking a complete mess. There's absolutely no way that you could manually texture that by exporting this UV map over into Photoshop, GIMP, or anything along those lines. It's not user friendly, it's not human friendly. Now sure, you can export this over into something like Substance Painter or Mixer and it will kind of work, but you end up with issues where this stuff is all so tightly packed together. We either have issues with resolution on the model itself because there's so much to cram in, and half of it is behind the model as well. There's stuff that inside faces, and again, it was never designed to be a game-ready asset. It was designed to just a 3D sketch, slap it together, render it, see what people think to the overall shape. But we didn't have time during the production, so we moved forward with that. But we'll end up talking more about optimization in the upcoming Mag Racer course, hopefully. So we've got horrible a UV unwrap there, and if we have a look at the delta, see, this is far more friendly. Yes, it's got all of this gumph at the top here, which is mainly something we're going to remove shortly, which is this grill at the back. It's got far too much complexity and detail that really needs to be baked down to a texture or something along those lines in order to get everything sorted. Now, that's a great example of an okay unwrap, because I can come in and sketch on this. You know exactly what you're doing. This is going to be the top. Is that overlapping UVs? Yes, look, there are overlapping UVs, so it's not good in that respect. But again, these are quick and dirty exports to get things ready for a prototype game. And it's something that, like most things, if you end up taking a lot more time to do something, that's great, but you've taken a lot more time, and at the moment we're focused not purely on a final game, we're focused on a course, so we get things out rough and ready to show you guys what things will be like, and then we can talk about actual real world problems, because now this is in our game, it's also a lot of work to pull it out and retexture it. You know, there's all of the teams that would need to be redone, so there's a balance point there to be had. So we've actually got what happens at the moment is this would be exported to something like Substance Painter, and Yann's been putting together all of the ships, basically all of the different teams, which is pretty awesome. And I find the craft that is created absolutely phenomenal. But once again, if I go ahead and grab one of the textures itself, we'll see it applied over in Blender itself. So let's go ahead and just open up an image, and then I can apply it. Let's do this in the shading tab. Oh, yes, I've already done it. Fancy that. So here we go. So I've been putting together some of these things, so Yann's got some shots about them. So they are actually already in here. Brilliant. So we can have a look at that. If we go back to UV editing and switch over to the right image, like we don't want that, we want the delta albedo. There we go. So even better example of what's going on there. So this was exported, not textured within Blender, it was textured within Substance Painter. And then I've grabbed that texture that's been generated and pulled it back in. And we can see here, there's a lot of repeated stuff as well. So this is something with a bit more manual intervention. You could come in and very deliberately texture your model using what's called a trim sheet. Now, trim sheets are often used for more environment stuff rather than a hero asset like a craft here. But since there's a lot of repeating textures, you could quite easily go ahead and do that. And we can see here there's some padding around the images. So if we come in and go into edit mode on the delta, make sure everything's selected, you can see there's a margin around all of your stuff. And the reason that margin exists there is so that when you get to an edge or something like that, it knows that one edge will be this color and something else will be another color. If it's exactly along the edge of a polygon, you're going to start having some troubles later on. Are we better starting with a high detailed image and scaling down until performance increases, or start low poly and increase detail as needed? Both. And the reason why I say that is because when you're first starting with a game, let's just say you're starting with a blank sheet, we're not making a mag race, you're just starting a particular game, you come up with an idea, you'll often need some rapid iteration. And that's what this craft started out as. Yann put together a simple wedge that he could fly around in Godot. And that itself enabled him to make the rest of the game up until a point where it was playing really well, but it was visually not very stimulating. At that point, that's where we came along and started creating the extra ships, etc. And in fact, even though he had made the Delta, I'd gone ahead and sketched out this clunky back at the beginning of the year, and I just said, what about this one? He said, that's cool. Nabbed it, put it in game, and of course it wasn't made for a game, and we've learnt quite a bit by coming back in and out. And we'll jump into Godot in a bit and have a look at how the different ships, they actually affect frame rates. Being in the Delta gives you, because it's close up on your screen, because not only is it quite a wide ship, so it's occluding a lot of geometry, it also impacts of the other ships because it's blocking those as well. But when we're flying around in this, I think we saw about a 10 frame per second on my machine drop, which is obviously I think that works out to be about a 2% drop. But if you start adding up those 2%, if for some reason our random generator picked all different teams, it will always do that, but picked up a we're calling this a Sentinel now rather than Clunky, which is a much better name. So it picked all Sentinel ships. Your game would actually be slower because of that. And that's one of the things about optimization. And I've started to redo this particular ship. Excuse me. Let's see if we can have a look at how I've called it Untitled, which is awesome. So this is a kind of a modern or more modern version of that ship that I'm putting together. And as you can see, I not parented these two things together. Let's bring that back down and do that now before I forget. So parent those, brilliant, and lift that up and out of the way. So, oh, I've been sketching on that earlier. I think I was showing Yann something about it earlier. So let's clear the annotations down. Then we can have some fresh ones if I'm drawing stuff. So this is the Sentinel sort of version 2, and it's far less polygons straight away. It hasn't got any of the extra hull plating and details on it yet, but it's not going to push it up that much. If we have a look, the triangles, this is 1080, so it's not very many at all. So we've got plenty in the budget if our last iteration was 80 odd thousand. Yeah, it's always an answer both. I should be a politician. Yeah, so when it comes to lowering the mesh. You can see that I quite like the overall shapes and forms that this ship is already creating. There are some areas here we need to sort out, etc. But overall, this is coming together really, really well. And if I turn on how it will look with a bevel modifier subdivision and a weighted normals modifier turned on as well, you can see it sharpens up the craft quite a bit. Well, I don't know with YouTube compression, it might look exactly the same for you guys, but it sharpens up the craft quite a bit. And let's have a look at the polygon count for that particular object. So going to give it that down in the bottom. Unfortunately not. Now I'm going to have to apply those modifiers to see what that would be, because when you export, let's say as a GLTF, one of your options under geometry is to apply your modifiers, which is really useful because it means that you can work, I suppose this is an optimizing Blender tip, it means you can work in Blender with the low poly models and you know when you export that it's going to have all of your modifier stack engaged, and I've turned that off previously so it's just faster in the viewport, faster to work with. We'll move on to texturing in a moment because I wanted to talk about using a slightly different workflow if you were stuck in Blender, can't use Substance or Quix or whatever the reason happened to be. But let's apply these and see what... Am I in object mode? Yep. So Control A on this lot over here. You're going to respond. Hello. Apply. Oh, yeah, I'm in 2.83, aren't I? Okay, so with all of those on there, we've got a ship that actually comes back up to around 67,000. So I think I won't have all of those applied. Or is the subdivision surface modifier a little high? No. Okay. So it's amazing there on how much extra geometry you can create accidentally with your modifiers. I should have practiced that before stream so it doesn't look so quonky, but there we go. So texturing. The reason why we've got two different vehicles here is because I've been playing with two different ways of texturing within Blender. One is using a tile set, and what that basically entails is you can have a texture that looks along this sort of texture. You've probably seen them before, often used in environments, and then you map an individual polygon to each area on your texture. It's a really good use of texture space. It can get a bit boring if you're not careful, because you will end up with repeating patterns all over the place. But as long as those repeating patterns kind of make sense, you're fine. Now, you can also see on here, I've been testing two specific decals, and these ships look different. I'm still trying to work out the material workflow in Blender so the normal maps actually matter, sort of match one another. But in this particular instance, these decals are part of the material, so they're part of the hull itself, and you can see this one's got a worn away effect on it, but it will actually follow the contours of the model underneath. If we have a look at the shading graph here, it's a complete mess, but down here we have the B, and up here, yeah, I must have moved it because I was playing with the colouring and it was just closer down here to have it part of the base colour going through. We have here the what would you call it, the bio symbol, warning biohazard symbol. It goes here, and then I can come in and change the actual color of that, and I can change the amount of wear as well. So one of the things you'll spot here is the fact it's worn away. I was just trying that. We don't even have to have that in there at all. I can take the factor out and it just recompile the shaders. It can be a nice solid shade. So that's really cool how you can make it part of the underlying material. The workflow here would require you to bake this all finally to a final texture rather than leave it like this, because at the moment this is all kind of within Blender itself and its rendering pipeline, which will be different in a game engine itself. So that is something to bear in mind there. The other way of texturing, and I know I'm glossing over any of this, if anybody has any questions, please ask, and I should try and answer them. This way down here is a bit more intuitive. So in order to move a texture on here, you have to move a UV map, a separate UV map. So for instance, if I go into UV, we've got the biohazard symbol here. I need to switch over to the appropriate UV map, So we've got multiple UV maps on a model. It's the toxic one in this case. I need to make sure I'm in edit mode so I can see it. Well, I might need to sort out the mirroring that's going on there. And, oh, that's funky. There we go. So here, if I go ahead and grab this section here, this is obviously the front of the craft, the way it narrows down. So if I go ahead and grab that and move it down, you can see that I can move it. Oh, it is separate. Look at that. But you can replace them there. And that's not as intuitive when you're modeling than the other method. And the other method is something you probably come across before, and that is that these are separate pieces. So if we go over to this craft, in fact, let's hide the other one out of the way by isolating this one, and let's go over to textured mode. Really? Oh, I've isolated the other things as well. Okay, that was brilliant. Let's bring that out, highlight them, and then isolate. There we go. So these themselves are using a shrink wrap modifier, but it does leave a small gap. So you have to remember to do things like turn off shadows, and otherwise you end up with a shadow underneath. And they also don't follow the underlying normal map, which in this case is not going to be very noticeable, but in some cases could stand out quite a bit, and it would be obvious that it was something on top. But the great thing about this is it's much easier to place on your model. And we'll see one of the downsides now. If I look at this from the side, as I move it along, have I placed it correctly? Yes. But if you're not careful, it ends up snapping and twisting and moving itself around. But as I mentioned before, it doesn't get affected by the underlying normal map. So if you place it over a piece like this that has a change in lighting, it will occlude it instead, and then you don't have that coming through. And you do have to do... here we go. Here's one of the funky things. Apparently that's locked to a bit of geometry that... I don't know what bit of geometry that's locked to, but it has locked itself to a bit of geometry. I wonder if there's a scale. It might be something to do with the scale here. Let's go ahead and apply that. No, that's not made any difference. But if you try and put it on, but with orthographic mode, it's a lot more sympathetic. So there, and obviously the top-down look. So there are two different ways on texturing. Not just texturing, but also adding decals to your model. Now, level of detail, this is something that I'll go full screen for a moment so I can chat with you guys. So level of detail was something that Yann and I were talking about earlier on, and we don't think it's going to make too much difference to the way that we've structured our game. However, it would be great to load in lower poly, maybe buildings in the distance. One of the things that we've tried so far, and we'll get... In fact, let's load up the Godot game engine and hop over to that for a moment. Let's open up MagRacer. One of the things with level of details is it's quite a manual process in Godot at the moment. So you'd have to probably load in both of your... or however many you've got. Say you had 3 level of details, one that was like primitive stuck together, a medium level one so you've still got the silhouette there, and then your full detail one. You'd have to preload all of those meshes, otherwise as it's swapped between them, as let's say a craft got further away, it would slow your game down whilst it loaded, and that would be no good from a play point of view. But even though we discovered today that even though Godot has a... Well, let's go and load up a mesh. Let's make sure you guys can see. Yep, perfect. If we go ahead and load up a hull that we've got, let's load up... the Delta. Nice simple craft. So we've got the Delta loaded up here. If we go ahead, and this not just ships, it'll be any mesh instance that you've got. If we go and have a look at the mesh instance itself, we've got sliders here for level of detail, and it's obviously something they're intending to implement at some point soon, but they haven't yet. So you have to code it in manually. You'd have to run a script that checks how far things are away from the player and swap out their meshes accordingly, which doesn't sound like that much fun. We've got the high detail stuff, so going back to Azrael's question earlier, if we have a high poly model with textures on it, all of that can be baked down to a lower poly model, and it might not look right, but if it's an asset you're using in the far distance and it looks good enough, that's absolutely fine. But there are some other things that we can do in Godot as well that help speed things along. There are numerous things. Now, I'm going to turn on my FPS counter on my monitor. When I've tried Fraps earlier, it wasn't giving me the right readout in terms of frame rate. So this monitor's a G-Sync monitor, so I think it goes to 165 hertz. So it's locked at 165 at the moment whilst we're here. And I won't be able to read out precise numbers because it'll jump all over the place. In fact, it'll be updating 165 times a second. But it will mean that I can turn things on and off. And if you haven't done yet, let me just post a link. If I know Yann did over on the Discord, but not everybody's going to be on the Discord, of course. Let's launch Discord. I'll make sure that you guys have a link over to the latest build of the game because we've added in some extra options. One of the things when you start dealing with 3D is you've seen it yourself. You're playing a 3D game and you go into the menus options and you've got resolution, shadows, reflections, all of these things. They make a huge difference to the game experience. And I think... yes, in Blender, I wish that was easier to see. It'd be great to have a HUD up here. Shame Google Glass never took off. I was thinking more on the side of Blender. So yes, when it comes to making a model, it's very likely that we'll go through the process of creating that high detail model and baking down the normal map from that high detail model as a minimum to the low poly version. And the reason for that is because then you've got the bespoke settings. And then if you want to, you can mix and match things together. So I've already gone through the process figuring out how to mix normals within Blender. But if you don't want to do that, you can still export all of your assets to something like Mixer or Substance Painter and add to the normal map there as well. So that's something to bear in mind. Oh, look, you can see part of my garage wall back there. Never mind. That's when I moved the camera earlier. There we go. I'm a sticker for things being right. There. Anyway, so yeah. Baking from that high detail down to the low detail is always the right thing to do. And when I'm building a model, I start from the low detail and build up with detail, trying to make the whole model a very similar level of detail. It's no point one area being hyper detailed and the rest not. It will stand out like a sore thumb and not look right. It's not about looking realistic. It just won't look right to anybody looking at the particular model. So yes, level of detail is actually part of my workflow accidentally by the way I build up meshes from simple detail and onwards. If any of you have followed with Godot Getaway, you could see how the low poly cars there, it would be very easy to add more detail to them and basically end up with a much more higher detailed car. And that underlying base mesh means it's a lot easier to edit. If you were and using something like a subdivision workflow really helps with that because it helps you keep a good topology across your model. It's when topology does actually matter is when you use something like a subdivision surface modifier to increase the geometry on your model and make things smoother and add more detail. And it can get quite complex because the underlying mesh can end up looking quite foreign compared to the larger set. So that there are things to consider. It does depend what you're making as well at the end of the day. Now, I said I was going to just go and grab you guys that link. So let's make sure I'm in the right channel. One of you might beat me to it. So here we go. What have we got? Yann posted it earlier. Where did he paste it? There he pasted it. Copy the link and I'll post that down here. Go into great details. Well, I try. I always try my best to not gloss over things. It irks me whenever I take courses all the time. It's the best way of entering an area you're unfamiliar with or seeing different techniques. That's always important. But one of the things that I've often come across is people either glossing over because they don't know about something, which is very easy to do. Either saying we don't, there's a difference to saying we're not going to worry about that at the moment because discussing it is only going to muddy the waters with what we're doing, to don't worry about that, it's not important, when in fact it has a profound impact on one of the settings without realizing what that does. I was watching a video the other day with the Bevel Modifier. Let's skip back over to Blender real quick so I can show you guys what I was talking about. So in the Bevel Modifier, which would best be demonstrated, ships, yeah, if I go into my ships file, yeah, so in the Bevel Modifier itself there is, no, not ships, it's Untitled, isn't it? I was in the right file, silly me. Bevel Modifier, there is this option here. If Melachron's on, thank you for pointing this bit out, because so this is hard and normal the option in the Bevel Modifier, and it does do a similar thing as the Weighted Normals modifier. If I turn the Weighted Normals off, you can see that the shading on the ship goes a bit funny, especially here actually around the wing. It completely breaks down, and we go ahead and we turn the Weighted Normals on. Oh, it's not just that, is it? The subsurf as well that's there. Okay, bad me, that wasn't the example, not the best example anyway, but you see, yeah, this is actually quite a good map cap to show it on. You see how there's it's a bit wrinkly or warped in places. It's not a catch-all solution, but applying the Weighted Normals modifier tightens things up, especially along the creases on the body. Anyway, what I was saying was it here, Hardened Normals, kind of does the same thing as Weighted Normals, but in this particular case it's a weight of 50 and it's locked at that. You can't play with these settings. Now I'm not going to go into the details of what all of this does. I'm clicking stuff, but you can see on the screen, again, maybe not with the YouTube compression, but the actual shading does change on your model, and having control over it here is better in some cases, not all, but it's better than just ticking a box that you're not quite sure what it does. But there we go. So yeah, I've disappeared for a moment there off of seem to go into a lot of details. Yeah, I try and keep things realistic. Try and make sure that if we're teaching something, you know why. That's the important thing. So you're not just blindly following along. And if you have taken any of my courses, you'll know that I encourage you all the time to go off and do your own thing. Use mine as instruction, but do it on your own thing. Jelly has been great with that with his jelly cars in Godot Getaway. I love how he's developed that whole scene. But anyway, let's do a bit of Godot for a bit. And again, if you've got any questions as we're going along, just give me a shout. Right, so things that we can do. I'm going to click play to begin with. Just show off the game we're working on and for the Kickstarter we're running. Let's go ahead. I want to play. I will select a team. There have been quite a few changes, but I won't delve into too much detail in the actual thing. We want to save some of it for the live stream next week. But I do want to show you guys the impact it can have on your frame rate. Just some basic settings, and obviously we can turn some things off in code as well. So let's just turn the volume down completely for the moment. My controller has gone off. So let's just go to sound options, turn that down. So I can hear myself think, because that's quite loud, and so we can just focus on the options itself. So one of the options that we included relatively recently, but I think it was there last week, was the full screen option. And for me to see my graphics readout on my screen, I'm going to have to turn that on. So I can see at the moment, and I know the game's not running, so we're not taking into account the time taken to do the AI calculations or the physics calculations. But when the game's paused, we're actually looking at a lot of just the graphics stuff. Now, two really big ones that will knock people out. In fact, I need to turn off my massive cursor. So let's go into magnifier and turn that off. Otherwise, I won't be able to see my cursor. Excellent. Which must mean that you guys can't see it either. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, it's loaded up. Fine. I got confused for a moment. OBS went black. Oh, which one was that? I just rattled off an absolute ton. But yeah, reflections are really high cost. If I turn reflections on... Oh, well, let's turn everything on extreme distance. Now, we've noticed that extreme distance in this case is not going to make too much difference to the actual scene itself. So I've got everything turned on that I can possibly turn on, and my game is running at about 110 frames per second with, in fact Yann's done some extra optimization, which I've got in front of me here, so I'm probably going to hit 165 frames per second. But I'll just turn them on and off individually so we can see what the impact is by themselves. It's not going to be scientific by any stretch of the imagination. So reflections. Now you can change your reflections. We'll go into Godot. I'll show you that area in a moment. But we can change our reflections very easily over in the screen spaced reflections, or SSR, in Godot. So I can turn it off, and when I turn it off, so the reflections themselves, it goes from 110 frames per second to 130. So there's a good leap there by just not enabling reflections. It's worth knowing that causes that to happen. View distance. If I go for a low, and you'll see it will start to cut off some of the buildings, we go from 110 to around 120. So in our particular game, the view distance doesn't really it does make a difference, but it doesn't make a huge difference, which is important to know, because our city is obviously close enough together that that's not a particular issue. Let's turn that back up to extreme and back around 110. Shadows, this is another big one. Turning shadows off, it bumps it up straight away. It changes the entire feel of the game, of course, but it changes it to around 135 frames per second. Glow is not going to make a big difference. We don't have a lot of nighttime stuff going on. I know Yann's working on a nighttime map at the moment, which is going to be really exciting. It's going to look quite cyberpunk. Yeah, totally. Doing your own thing after following a lesson. I've always done it. I'm going to segue off here for a second, and I'm going to have a drink of coffee first. So yeah, I've got this habit of, if I'm following along, especially with a course and it's taking you step by step, I often suddenly have an aha moment in my head. And when I have that aha moment, I end up being in the position where I've gone off. When I was taking Yann's Godot course, I'd go off, do my own thing, go, I get this, and I'll get to a point where I just genuinely had gone so tangentially to everything else in the course, I had to go and find out what I'd typed before. And again, source control is great. Whether or not you're doing Blender stuff with assets and everything, whether or not you're uploading it to the web doesn't matter, but having some sort of source control so you can roll back to when you deviated from something. I'd go off and do my own thing, learn a bit from failing. That's always really important. And then I come back and I'm like, oh no, this is so much different. You go on to the next lecture and you have to just rewind all your code, because what you had done works, but you can't integrate it easily because you're a beginner and all the rest of it. So yeah, do your own thing. Great. Let's go back to these things here, and I'll show you a bit in the code as well. Fog. We have got a fog glow, a haze. Again, that's something that does lower it slightly, but it's within margin of error. I mean, it's going between 109 and 113, and I turn on fog and it goes from 109 to 113. So yeah, that's hardly anything there. Ambient occlusion. Now, ambient occlusion is a texture that you can make yourself over in Blender. If you bake down your ambient occlusion, in fact, that's one of the ones that we've got on the channel that I've actually managed to upload. It's got one of the cars from Godot Getaway on it. But if I will post a link to the ambient occlusion one in a second. I'll go grab it first of all, and then I will continue. So ambient occlusion is one of those, it's exactly what the name says. It's the light in the ambient. So imagine your model was sat in complete isolation. What parts of the model are occluded from the overall light source? And it will basically create some really nice shadows. and in your crevices and things like that. And that's a really useful thing to do. Oh wow, I've got to go off to another page to get this link. Here we go. Baking Ambient Occlusion map. Let's get a shareable link and I can ping that across. Hey Melicon, how you doing? And I'm going to butcher that name if I try. Yavanvan37, hello and welcome. That is the link to the Ambient Occlusion. In fact, Melicon requested that. One of the things we often say to you guys is request something and we'll try our best. And he caught me at a great time because I just finished doing the same thing over in Godot Getaway. So I thought it was a great value add for the rest of the world. Since I'm drinking a coffee and chatting, I'll make myself big again. So yeah, Ambient Occlusion is where you're baking down details of where light is and where it's not. Now, this Ambient Occlusion in the game itself, let's go back here now, I'll make myself big and small again. This Ambient Occlusion is screen spaced Ambient Occlusion. So it's faking the Ambient Occlusion, which is great. But it's expensive. If I turn it off, I'm up to 130 frames per second. So your shadows, reflections, all jump me if I turn them on and off by 20 frames per second each. So if I actually turn off reflections, off shadows, and off ambient occlusion, I have a completely different looking game, but I'm now running at 165 frames per second. It's probably higher than that, but my monitor, I'm not getting the information up there for it. So that's something that makes a phenomenal difference. The other thing that we discovered that makes just as much difference is our motion trail, our particle effects. In fact, I won't have to go in the code here because Jan's actually put this button here. Now, I don't think if I turn all of these back on, it's going to make a difference here. But if I actually start... my controller is working. If I go in game and I'm accelerating, you can see at the moment there are there's no trail out the back like we're used to looking at. But if I go ahead and go to my menus, options, and turn motion trails on, and just sit here, so I'm going to try and be as scientific as possible. I'm sat here at 100... But between 100, it's obviously physics calculations and everything going on here. I'm jumping between around 100 and 130 frames per second. And there'll be other things going on with the racers on the track as well. If I go ahead and turn off those motion trails, I'm now hovering between 120 and 140 frames per second. And this actually makes difference depending on where the motion trail is as well. If it's falling off the back of your craft or your craft is blocking it, especially true with the delta because it comes out of the delta, but the delta is such a wide craft when you're this close to it, that makes a huge difference to the frame rate. So that's something to bear in mind, and it's something, if you've been a PC gamer for a while, it's something that you kind of get used to. I've been very fortunate for the last... I use a GTX 1080. Yann uses a 1060. So we're quite fortunate to have what I class as mid-range cards these days. Obviously the 1060 is not as fast as the 1080, but I have been able to play a lot of my games until I got this monitor flat out on the monitor. But not everybody has these computers, and thank you very much for you guys that have helped us out. I think Pacost has helped massively as well. With some of the testing that we've been doing, that's made a huge difference, and why this stuff has now been put into the game. We realise that I've got a computer through the other room that's got a second generation, so 8 years old Core i5 in it, so 4 cores, and it's got a 1080 Ti in it. So this has made a big difference. It's actually playable. It was playable-ish. I wouldn't have called it a great experience, but it was certainly playable through the other room. But it wasn't a fun game to play. It was a slideshow, essentially. And these settings, I can now turn them off. So if you've been playing PC games for a while, and PC hardware has become so powerful in recent times that you can still get a really good experience with the settings turned down. A couple of things we probably won't implement after the level of detail discussion earlier would be level of detail for our craft. I don't think we're pushing, or the buildings themselves, I don't think we're actually pushing Godot hard enough that level of detail is going to make a tremendous amount of difference. It does make some difference. If I'm flying along in this ship than the Sentinel, which is the one actually at the top here, you know, the one we were looking at earlier with all the rivets and stuff in it. There is a notable frame rate difference because of the number of bits of geometry in it, basically. So we've got to be careful in some respects, but actually building your assets consciously and thinking about this is going to be in a game engine, I've got to make sure that backside faces are not there. In fact, it'll be a great example if I go into Blender for a moment and bring across... Oh, that's just an extra window. That's no good. I want the actual window. There we go. If I go and open up, I think it's not in this one, it's in this version of Blender. So I run so many different versions of Blender, my open recents file is difficult to get at. So, oh, a bit of script on screen. That's the other thing, of course, with the courses, etc. I've not switched over to screen. There you go, you guys can see. When it comes to making sure that the workflow is quick and easy in anything, if we can provide a script for you to help out with that. So yeah, script here, what it does in this particular instance with the project I'm working on is it'll go and take your files, it'll export anything within a collection called pieces to a Unity project. Haha, a bit of a giveaway that it might be for not Godot in this case. But it will check if it's a mesh object. If it is a mesh object, it will do the rest of the stuff. If not, it will ignore it. It'll ignore all children as well, so it'll only export the parents. And of course, you can change all of this once you get the hang of scripting. And then further down here, the FBX export, etc. And it will save and it will revert the file as you go as well. So it would save it, make changes, and then just reload it. That was the easiest way rather than trying to memorize where everything was. It's the safest way of performing that action. Yeah, anyway, so in here, if I turn on this model, you'll see that it's not solid. It's deliberately not solid in places. We've got what's called, well, they're just planes, essentially. They're thin sheets, infinitesimally small, and there's no back to them. We want to make sure that they're in any game, you're not having to render or calculate geometry that's inside itself. Now, there is some geometry that require you need it to be watertight or manifold is the technical term for it. But game engine stuff, no. Unless you're using booleans to construct it. I've come in and I've deleted faces, like at the bottom here. If I hide this bottom sheet here, you can see that this piece here comes down just there, and it did have another piece that came out here at the bottom. Oh, that was great drawing. I'm trying to draw with a mouse here. Have I got my tablet? No, it's underneath a pile of books. Why it's under a pile of books, I don't know, but it's underneath a pile of books. But yeah, there was geometry here, and there was geometry here. That's two faces, which is 4 triangles, because it would have been Blender still does triangulation in the background. That's why you end up with artifacts. It's not a NURBS solution. And if we draw like the triangle there and there, oh, that you can't really see that. So let's just delete that annotation. So the bit that would have been there would have been a triangle like that and a triangle like this. So you'd have ended up something along those lines. Now, there are 4 triangles there. 4 triangles here, 4 triangles here, and you just see how quickly you end up with your models having tons and tons of geometry in them that's absolutely not necessary at all. Azrael Studio, you're just behind my iPad there, so I didn't see that. So, oh, Pacos here. Fog is interesting. It works best with low view distance to hide the cutoff. Exactly. That. What's it? Silent Hill back in PS1 days. They used. I'm chatting. I'll do this. Yeah, Silent Hill used the fog technique not only for an eerie atmosphere, but because game engines at the time couldn't render a ton of polygons. It's a great example about using a limitation as an asset as well. Obviously these days we expect more, we expect vast view distances. Just look at games like Assassin's Creed where you climb up to a huge tower and you can just see everything in front of you, and a lack of draw distance in a competitive game can be a real disadvantage if you're not rendering something that makes a difference. I remember a few years back I was heavily playing PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, PUBG, and I learnt from watching some YouTube videos that if you wanted to play competitively, you turn the texture draw distance all the way down for things like grass, so that if someone was laying in a hill full of grass, long grass in the distance, you could just see them laying on a hill. Now, personally, I'd call that cheating, and there should be really some other way to obscure the players, but I don't know how you would do that otherwise. But anyway, yeah, it is important. Fog can hold things. Yeah, Morrowind is a great example, and that really helped with the atmosphere as well, because it's a foggy, mysterious place, so that works really well. Commercial games have those graphics. Yeah, totally. And we realised having more players able to enjoy the game is exactly what we need at this point in time, because we want people to be able to not only try the game out, see if it's something they're interested in, but by trying that out and getting excited about it, they can talk about it and share it, which if you haven't done already, we'd really appreciate if you did. Get the word out there just so we can start getting this going. And actually having those accessibility features, because that's what they are really, if you think about it. It's not how pretty something is, it's just as important to get accessibility features like color blindness, or if someone's deaf, how can you visually tell them on the screen that they're about to have an issue. And all of this is really important, but also having people being able to play the game and enjoy it. And that's why you hear time and time again about consoles targeting 60 frames per second, and of course now high refresh rate TVs are coming out as well, as in proper high refresh rate, not the fake motion enhanced stuff that they did back in the day. I'm almost chucked my coffee everywhere. Let me take a drink. Yeah, that's gone now. It was also cold. Yeah, it's amazing, and being able to have people having access to your game no matter what they're playing it on. In fact, when I go away, I typically don't take my gaming computer because it won't last a long time. It's as simple as that. I'll get 90 minutes on it if I don't have access to a wall plug. And I often will take like a MacBook Air from yesteryear, I think it's 2015, something like that, so a 5-year-old MacBook Air, and I'll play something like Project Zomboid does work on there, but that's not a great example. What's the game called? I hate it when my mind goes blank. You know what? I can just fire up Steam quickly and have a look at what it's called. It's going to bug me otherwise of what it's called. But yeah, this is why 2D games are really popular, because they work on so many platforms. And of course, one of the barriers of entry to making a 3D game is all of this extra complexity. Not only is the code a bit more complex, as they say, because you're dealing with 3D vectors, not just 2D vectors, and the game I'm thinking of... there's probably lots out there of really fun games. Have I not got it installed? Oh, that's a real nuisance. I thought I had it installed. I thought this was my get out of jail free card. It's not. It's similar to Prison Architect, but that's another great game actually. Prison Architect. So those type of games work. RimWorld is what I was thinking of. Brilliant. Yeah, having games that are accessible to people is really important. So, and yeah, lost my train of thought there. But anyway, Pacos, out of curiosity, what is the viewport size set for the current project? It could be possible to render the 3D scene at a lower res and upscale. Sketching in the viewport container. That's a very good question. Should we have a look together, boys and girls? Yeah, so a couple of things you can do to help you out in Godot is go to your environment. Now, I believe Yann has just the... has he called it world environment? I think it's this one here. No. He's renamed it since we played with it earlier. Oh, default environment. There it is. No, he hasn't. I apologise. So, if we have a look at the inspector... In fact, can I turn up my... No, it's editor settings, isn't it? Custom display scale. Let's turn that up to 1.5. Save and restart. So I'll be back in a second. Yeah. A couple of options, and then we can have a look at the 3D scene in the viewport container. Yeah, let's have a look first of all at the environment. So env default environment. So that's good, isn't it? Did I not adjust the editor scaling settings? Custom display scale. Okay, auto. Let's just set it to 150%. I'll try it once more. I'm pretty sure I did this before, but oh yeah, that's much bigger, much more readable. Brilliant. I don't want any of you guys to struggle because of YouTube compression or anything along those lines. So yeah, if we go to our default environment, and that's hopefully the last time I'm going to say that, have a look at over in the inspector. We've got a series of options, and this is where a lot of this stuff is set. Your sky texture that you've got there, ambient light and its impact on your scene. Again, if you've got a nighttime scene, you're going to probably want to turn that down. Obviously, not just here, but in the level itself. I'll leave that set at 1 for the moment. Fog, our fog settings are in here, tone map, etc. Auto exposure is quite nice. That's things like if you come out of a dark room, you could, in a dark room the exposure is set high. When you leave a dark room, it comes back down, giving you that kind of effect as you go out into the sun. Here are the big ones for us. So one of the things we discovered very quickly before we put the options in is we could just turn off screen space reflections, or SSR. Then we've got screen space ambient occlusion. That option is also here as well. We've got glow in here as well, and obviously we can the shadows themselves. Do we have shadow adjustment in here? No, shadows are on the lights in general, so we'd have to look at the lights in a scene to optimize that. And obviously one of the things that we could consider is baking the lighting for the scene, because currently we're not actually changing the position of the sun. That means that we could bake the level lighting. We're not having any dynamic lights in there as well. So that's another optimization that can be done. And Pacos there, I don't actually know how to get to the stretch scaling in the viewport container. I don't know how to get that there. I wonder if Yann's around. So yeah, I don't know where that is. So I'm not going to look for the moment until someone tells me where it is. The other thing is, of course, is I don't know what Yann might have called it. Did he call it container? Ready container? No. I'll have a quick look around. Let's... Oh, I don't want to shut down... Oh, no. I don't want to save that at all. Could be set for the project as a whole. Oh, these settings up here. So project settings. Yeah, we've tried lots of different options here. One of the things we also learned is that we can't go true full screen. So we can do full screen windowed, but I don't think there's an option to prevent your cursor leaving the screen, which is actually quite useful when doing stuff like this, because I can play the game. Obviously, when they're playing the game, we've disabled the cursor, but otherwise, when you're in a menu, you can come out and do things, which is really useful. But oh yeah, one of the things Yann turned off is the MSAA, the anti-aliasing stuff. That actually has a huge impact on the game itself. I'm not sure what we had it set up behind. Set it up before. The thing is, when we were generating the game, we just wanted it to look pretty to show off what we could do, and then when we started sharing it with people, we realized that we probably need to add in some of these options. So here are some of the other options as well to do with your lighting and shadows. We've got filter mode on the shadows. You could disable that filter mode if you wanted. That would improve performance, but your shadows will look worse and worse. And depending on the type of game, you can get away with no shadows in some cases. It would depend on what type of shading we're using. Because we're using a PBR setup, so we have realistic lighting with realistic materials, we have to obey by them. Yeah. 16 times, and because it was locked at that. So in this project settings, if you come in and you come down to, where is it? I've lost it now. The MSAA stuff that was further up, wasn't it? Oh, here's the shadow atlas for baking lighting down. MSAA. Yeah, if you go and crank it up to 16, no one's got a hope in hell, because you've just excuse me, you've automatically discarded a huge number of people who can't run it, because either their graphics card can't do it or it'll just slow down the game so much. Anti-aliasing is one of those things that older graphics cards are much worse at than more modern ones. So you can end up, let's say when we were doing that profiling earlier, you can end up being in a position where, oh, I'm only making 10 to 20 frames or 1 or 2 frames per second difference, only to find out someone on hardware is not just having a slower game by a little bit or by a linear amount, they're having an exponentially worse time, which is not good at all. And then the same with anisotropic filtering. So anisotropic filtering is, I'll go big for a second. Anisotropic filtering is when you have got textures like bricks or cobblestones on the ground, and it helps prevent the moire effect, where you probably get it on my shirt occasionally as well, maybe not this one. But it's when pixels overlap and it can't show. It's a physical phenomenon, and it just can't show the right detail, and you end up with these patterns forming. So the anisotropic filtering will help filter out anisotropic detail, which is really useful. But obviously, once again, I'm not quite sure. There's no drop down on this. So you set that at 64 or something, you would probably have it less able to run on many machines. So it's all something to worry about. Yes, I think down here on the window, display window. So currently it's loading up in a window at 1280 by 720, which is a reasonable size to start it up on, but it saves your configuration. So I've got it set to full screen, so on my computer it will actually go full screen when we start loading up. So I've gone to the display tab on the side here, and we've got a default size. It is resizable, which is good. And again, borderless and full screen. Full screen is obviously full screen. It's there, and borderless full screen does enable you to bring your cursor out, which was very confusing. Yann and I had a bit of backwards and forwards on, well, if it's borderless, that means you can move your cursor out, and if it's full screen, it should mean you can't do that. But it turns out that happened to be just a quirk with Godot rather than anything else. And there are obviously loads of options down here. Now, I could get away. I'm lucky enough to have a G-Sync monitor, so I could turn V-Sync off, because that does add a level of slowdown, but not a huge amount. It synchronizes the refresh rate of your graphics card with that of your monitor, if possible, or a multiple of the monitor. So a great example would be if you've got a monitor at 120 frames per second, and you can hit 120 or greater, the refresh rate would be that. If it dips below that, it'll go to 60. And that huge drop in frame rate is very apparent, so can cause a bit of stuttering with VSync turned on. And it's not great for fast-paced games sometimes, more Twitch-based games than Mag Racer. And again, if you drop below 60, it'll jump down to 30, it'll jump down to 15. So you end up with these huge, big steps. So some people don't like that and would prefer to have tearing, which is the other option, if you don't have something like FreeSync or a G-Sync monitor, which has an adaptable frame rate on the monitor. But you can't account for that as a game developer. You can't count that everybody has access to a variable refresh rate monitor, whether or not it's in the NVIDIA or AMD camp. But it is something to bear in mind that it does. We forced it on at the moment because of tearing. It's quite apparent in the game. But again, it's something that you could turn off with a variable refresh rate monitor. Notice the stretch mode is disabled. Most likely when it's resized, the effective resolution is also changed. Yes, Yann turned off the stretch mode because I think I was complaining a bit too much that I was running a game on a monitor with 4 times the resolution than the game was, or something along those lines. Anyway, it was lots of fun. I came in here and I was tweaking these figures every time I played, and I was like, "Is there a way of doing that?" They went, "Yeah." if you turn off that stretch mode, it'll work. So we turned it off so people could run at the native resolution of their monitor. However, we don't have a resolution setting at the moment. So if you want to run full screen and you've got quite a high resolution monitor but not a powerful 3D graphics card or integrated graphics in your computer, you can end up having a bit of a problem because you're running a game at a much higher resolution than you would have done normally. But that's something we can sort out as time goes on, especially, well, it's just another performance setting, isn't it, at the end of the day? And resolution's one of the big ones. Running at 720p versus 1440p, like I could here, well, that's 4 times less details being rendered, 4 times less pixels. Makes a big difference indeed. Okay, so I'm going to pour myself a little bit more drink. And I'd like to open up the floor for any questions. So we've been through a bit tonight on Blender and Godot. I don't want to drift on for too long, of course. But if you guys have any questions over what I've been across so far tonight, or indeed any other question, and if I can't answer the question for some reason, I'll make sure that it's noted down and I can either ask Yann about it, do some research about it, or perhaps revisit it at another time, especially if it's a long answer. Although, saying that, it's possible that a good question will get its own YouTube video made about it. That has happened, as Menacon contest to? No, you don't want to contest to it. Anyway, any questions, guys? In fact, I've really enjoyed this evening. I didn't think an hour would go so quickly. I want to get off soon and play some games rather than just make them. Friday's my game night, you see. So yeah, any questions? Otherwise, it'll be a good time to wrap up the evening, I think. And don't be shy if you're worried that it's a silly question. There is no such thing as a silly question. I should know this. I say that to people so I don't feel guilty myself when I ask silly questions. And I ask a lot of them. Okay, everybody. So, thank you very much for joining me this evening. If you do have any extra questions, remember to pop over to the Discord. If you've enjoyed the session so far, give us a like, subscribe to the channel so you know when the next live stream or videos coming out. And also remember to check out the Kickstarter as well. Link is in the description, I hope. Otherwise, I'm a complete numpty. No, it turns out I am a complete numpty. I can add that in here anyway. So yeah, I will add a link in because I am a genius. A bit late at the end of the stream, but you know, never mind. Thanks, Azrael. Thanks for joining me. Oh no, Yann hasn't tried to run Mag Racer on his phone. I can't remember what phone he has, but it is a very basic phone. I'm not sure how well it will cope with any 3D game. Not dissing his phone, I just genuinely believe it's a very basic phone. Although saying that, a lot of basic phones these days can run quite well. Anyway, I'm going to end up segueing into something else. Thank you everybody for joining us. Us? I'm used to Yann being here. Anyway, thank you for joining me, guys, and I shall catch you all later on. Take care. Bye!